Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carissa Moffitt-Miller, Chief Executive Officer for the Council of Chief State School Officers.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see so many of you with us. What a packed full room it is today. And I want to welcome you to the National Conference on Student Assessment with this year's theme of designing an effective, coherent assessment system for all learners. NCSA has been around for more than 50 years, focusing on highlighting innovations and sparking robust conversations to improve student assessment. It's provided a platform for educators, policymakers, researchers, and practitioners to come together to share insights and engage in meaningful dialogue aimed at enhancing assessment practices. And this year, we have welcomed more than 850 of you to join in this conversation. As we kick off our time here together in Seattle, I want us to think about how assessment plays a role in a coherent education system. It's easy to get absorbed in assessment as a singular event, diving deeply into our favorite topics of reliability, validity, AI-generated questions, scoring or reporting, and so many more technical parts of the field. Now, don't get me wrong, those are incredibly important, and you should learn about all of those things. But when we think about assessment as a piece to improving the education system, we must think about all the interconnectedness. I want to challenge each of you to ask how assessment can contribute to the bigger goals that your state chiefs are moving forward. We're going to hear from 3 different state chiefs about their vision for education and how they see assessment as a part of that bigger strategy. Now, it's always been true that we've asked so much from our statewide assessments than they were originally designed to do. I lived through that. So many of you have been living through that. But I'm also seeing in the world of assessment evolve to produce new tools that provide information throughout the year, assessments that don't have to have artificial bounds of measuring knowledge, assessments that can provide better information to teachers. A recent Future Ed report, many of you probably saw, called None of the Above, showed that more than half the educators surveyed in 2024 said that state tests would be more useful if, quote, they captured student learning over time rather than a single year-in snapshot. Again, this is not new. This is what educators have been asking for even back a couple of decades ago when I was working in state assessment. We certainly have come a long way. During the pandemic, we suspended some of the usual ways of doing business and focused on how to get more real-time information for teachers to find out the extent of learning loss the pandemic had created. Yes, we should have an accurate way to know where students are each year, but we also have to think about how we provide clear, focused information that helps them actually achieve better every year. I don't have to tell this room of measurement experts that assessments without some kind of change in instruction or increased interventions will give us the same results on the same trajectory every year. What I'm asking you as experts to think about during your discussions and over the next few days is how you would continue to design and redesign assessments. What I'm asking you to think about is how you play a role in bringing together more than just assessment leaders to create coherent systems of education for students. I'm going to start us off by sharing some exciting developments from 3 states that are leading the way in innovative assessment approaches. In January, the Washington Office of Public Instruction released its groundbreaking human-centered artificial intelligence guidance. Washington Superintendent Chris Rickdahl will join us to address questions regarding the state's pioneering AI guidance and its implications for assessment practices. Second, we will have a conversation with Indiana Secretary Katie Jenner, where we'll explore the reasons behind the decision to transition from the current assessment to a through-year assessment system. Indiana is currently in the process of revamping its iLearn assessment to enhance the quality and the usefulness. And last but not least, North Dakota Superintendent Kirsten Baszler and I will delve into their comprehensive assessment system and the impact on student learning. North Dakota has implemented an assessment system featuring both state-provided interim assessments and a statewide summative assessment. And that's just the first plenary today. This conference offers many opportunities to engage with experts, share best practices, learn from one another to ensure that our assessment practices meet the needs of all learners. But first, I want to extend some quick thank yous. A conference this impactful has many dedicated people behind it, and I would like to ask our NCSA Program Planning Committee to please stand. They are seated somewhere close to me here. Thank you. You will see all of their names on the screen. This planning committee dedicated their time to review over 230 proposals, so that is not an insignificant lift. Thank you for your contributions. I also want to give a special acknowledgement and ask these two people to stand. Our planning committee chair, Allison Timberlake from Georgia, and vice chair, Stephanie Snyder from DC, for all their hard work in coordinating this year's program. Thank you all for all the work that you've done to help make this conference so impactful and such a big part of what everyone will be able to experience this week. So with that, I'm going to ask Superintendent Reichdahl to join me on stage. Good afternoon.
Greetings.
I think you probably want to give people a welcome to your great state.
I do indeed. Welcome to Washington State. Welcome to Seattle, Washington. You're sitting in the home of native lands, 13,000 years or more, 29 federally recognized tribes, and we honor very much in the state our tribes. They're sovereign nations and partners with the state. So any of you who have that relationship in your state know how important it is, so I'd start with that. And I have one bit of advice for you if you're sticking around very long. If you've never driven up to the 6,000 foot level of Mount Rainier, which you can do with a pass, I'd encourage you to do it. There's something about looking at a 14,410 foot composite volcano in the middle of summer in glaciers to really humble yourself. You're going to learn a ton at this conference. We're so glad you're in the Puget Sound. You're going to appropriately feel small at the base of that mountain. And I think sometimes that is the symbolism that we need, because as our students sort of take their journey up mountains, we put a lot in front of them that makes a lot of sense to us. Big brains, psychometricians, some of the great work you all do, it's daunting to them and it's humbling to them. And so my symbolic representation and hope for you is get up to the mountain. When you're in the Northwest, get up to the mountain. So other than that, thank you for being in the Puget Sound with us.
Well, thank you for that welcome. And we're going to ask them to stay here for 2 days and then go up to the mountain and take. So you're not doing that this afternoon. You're actually going to go to sessions. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into a lightning round about your human-centered AI guidance that Washington published in January. And with the increasing discussion about AI, the increasing infusion of AI, talk to us about how you in Washington are seeing it being used in teaching, learning, and especially for assessment. What is your vision for that?
Yeah, I think what we observed right away, like you all did, was, of course, a powerful tool, these large language models. It's combing billions and bits of information at a time, and it's producing something. And for the first time, we have a technology that's producing content instead of sending us somewhere to a location. The beauty of Google is it found us. We went and we found a location. And then people paid to get higher up on the ranking list in the Google world. And then it didn't exactly take us where we're going. AI is different. AI is going to generate new knowledge for us. It has the ability to compute in ways that our brains can't quite do that. And while we're all talking large language right now, which is sort of go out and produce a paper, which is exciting, it's going to get real fast. When your data sets in your school districts and in your states are sitting in the cloud in a place where you might then get to access that, you're going to not have large language models, but you're going to have medium language models where you're just going to be able to comb the data in your states, in your districts, in your regions. And you're going to find answers that you don't have to necessarily ask. It isn't the old research question and design backwards. It's going to really be big data that informs that. And then lastly, what we did is we thought about it from there's large language that's just sort of write the 5-page paper, and there's medium language, if you will, that's our own data sets. Then there's the individual child. And the individual child is taking a journey through public education. We're capturing a lot of information about them, but we're sticking this summative assessment on them at the end of spring and asking an 8-year-old on a keyboard 7 months after they started their 3rd grade year to remember what they learned in September. I don't know about you, I had 2 teens. That's a small miracle, by the way. So I think what we learned is if you really center this in, the student can produce the content, ask the inquiry. AI should produce this powerful opportunity for kids, and then on the back end, they have to then touch it and feel it and edit it, and it's going to come to assessment. It's going to make its way to assessment. It's timely. We're all going to have to re-engineer the way we think about assessment so that the sophistication of that tool is a complement and a supplement to the teacher, so the educator gets information and can rebuild instructional design for kids and maybe take some of that assessment load off of teachers.
I want to punctuate what you said, which was a complement and a supplement. It's not a replacement. And it's not a replacement for any of the assessment that we've done, but it's a complement and a supplement is, I think, how you look at it. Talk to us about, when you're thinking about this, how it might be important for subgroups of students when you think about your big picture for education in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Washington, we're all different, by the way. You're going to hear from 2 other superintendents who are just amazing folks in other states, but I think the beauty of CCSSO and this conference is you all come from different states and you have different sort of expectations and values. And for me, I've always wanted a national assessment model that was about sampling methodology, much more robust, bigger end sizes so we can really get student groups. I think with AI, you're going to have the power to do that in ways you've never seen before. As students go through an iterative process, think of reading, for example, and we've got vendors here who do this work already. As that student is reading to their screen, even 30 minutes a week, 45 minutes a week, it's picking up things that even our human ear can't pick up. They already know the basic demographics of students, and when they can say, Michael, Sarah, and Eric, this is what they're struggling on. Please tailor something to them that's very specific. It's fluency for them, and over here, it's word recognition, and over here, it's a comprehensive issue. With that is all the demographic data. So we'll see disproportionality faster. We're not going to wait till spring to see it. It should allow educators to respond more quickly, again, as a complement to their instruction, so that those of us who got into teaching, we did it because we wanted to move kids and build relationships. Most of us in our instructional programs, our pre-service programs, sorry, psychometricians, most of us didn't get assessment. We got you should do a quiz along the way, and at the end, you should have a test at the end of the chapter. And then all of a sudden, the federal government came along and said, and then we're going to test every kid through 8th grade and once in high school on 2 or 3 subjects, and we're going to put $1.5 billion a year into it. Most teachers were not built for that. They were built for relationship building and instructional delivery. And so when they get tools, I think, that help them disaggregate data and tell them specifically the skills that kids need, I think we're going to hit a hyperdrive here on assessment that's probably going to make a lot of what we do today feel like the Flintstones.
I was in the assessment directors meeting today, and we talked a lot about data literacy. And what I hear you saying is there's some real possibilities with AI to increase some of the data literacy, the assessment literacy, that can then allow teachers to focus on what they are doing best, which is instructing kids.
I think so. There's a time element that's going to be saved here as well. It does require common language. So all of those ELA instructors or all those math or all those science folks, they're going to have common language about this. And I'll predict that states will get smart enough to not do this one school district at a time. That's inefficient and inexpensive. And I think you'll see more enterprise approaches to this. And the second you do that, you better have PD for your educators, because if in my state, if Spokane, Washington is using the same, iterative assessment model using an AI tool as Seattle or Vancouver or Bellingham, they need to have a really common understanding of what's coming out of that thing. So we're probably into that space where the efficiency is finally available to us. And in our state, we have 295 districts, and I do not want 295 different AI tools out there. Ideally, I want one.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the slide that we have up here?
So this is part of what motivates us. Not only is it Pride Month, which we take very seriously in Washington State and Seattle, so happy Pride Month to everybody. I didn't just create this beautiful rainbow of color. Yeah, please, that's good, worth applauding for, absolutely, yeah. We didn't just produce this to celebrate Pride, but we take advantage of it in June. What you're really looking at right here, you're looking at assessment scores that we just couldn't believe. And we're a smarter balanced state. We have a 1, 2, 3, 4 system. Most of you who use that system do as well. I still think we make this artificial cutoff at 2, but then we put high, medium, and low in each one. So there's high 4s and medium 4s and medium 3s. And we looked at where students are coming from in each of those and then where they end up. And it was honestly a little bit troubling to see it, because that is not a distribution that most people would want to see. Sometimes it feels as random from one year to the next on where students end up as throwing spaghetti at the wall. You can see those high 4s are going to be high 4s, right? Those kids are ready to go to, I almost said Harvard, but instead I'll say Washington State University. The day they get to 3rd grade, go Cougs. And you can see there are students who just fill it in as fast as they can and they get out of that room and there's always a group of them. But really in that 2-3 range, there's so much variability that there's almost no predictability for individual students. And so then we just zoom in and I give you one example. Like this is where everyone's coming from on the far left from 3rd grade. This is where they ended up in 6th grade. So we grab those middle 2s right there and look at the distribution in 7th grade the next year. That is not a system that's accurately predicting student knowledge. That's a kid who didn't eat lunch on that day on a Thursday and took an assessment in the afternoon and went from a 2.3 down to a 1.6. And next year they might be a high 3. And so I'm going to constantly challenge folks, my state included, who are using sort of these binary systems of like a 3 and above and you're proficient and below that you're not. That's not exactly what any of us actually do. In my state, those 2s, by the way, go to college at a 50% rate and 70% of them persist into their 2nd year of college. So it's not even a predictor of individual students. And this is the kind of stuff that has us worried about summative assessments, because we know we need state accountability. We respect that. We know there's a congressional act and we're going to follow that. But if anyone ever thought these summative assessments were about knowing individual students, I think the game's over. Y'all can turn that back to the other one now.
So talk to me about what you are looking for. Like obviously it's a much more large scale of information about students. Like what's the ideal system for you?
I think the ideal system focuses on where students are. If you think about sort of pre and post, they're coming in the fall. We do all kinds of evaluation in school districts across the United States. We know where they are, and then we have a concept of where we want them to be, and we sort of course, have interim assessments or we have formative stuff along the way, but it's really inconsistent. I mean, we leave that up to the classroom teacher, and in my state, there's a law that leaves that to individual teachers. But then, boom, this thing kicks in the spring, and then we can't believe that there's this array. Well, with a really AI-based system, students are in that maybe every 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and they're reading or they're doing their math. It's capturing everything. It's building a concept of that individual learner, and it's pushing that educator to say, these students are ready to accelerate, this is what these students need. So we don't get to the end of the year and ultimately need a summative assessment. We've built it all year long, and we know the growth of those students, and there's amazing growth, and we know who meets some proficiency line. But along the way, we had much better information to build instructional design for kids who need it the most. And as much as we've tried to do that for 30 years, I think that's what's kind of been lost in the summative obsession.
So is your goal to then replace what you've just described?
I pay those people, by the way.
I know, I was like, is that your staff back there?
Yeah, no.
Chris?
They're at a different table, so thank you. Yeah.
So is the goal to then replace what you have for summative right now with the system that you've just talked about?
It is absolutely our goal and our vision. I think collectively as a country, you are the biggest brains who could help us get there. We're still going to have assessment. It matters a lot. I think we should all be focused on growth and recognize that is such a genuine approach given the income inequality of our country, given the barriers that kids face. We want to push everyone as much as we can. But to tell a student beginning in 3rd grade, because they're getting a middle 2, that they're a failure in 3rd grade, they're missing it in 4th grade, they're missing it in 5th grade, even though they're making yearly gains, is a real injustice. And I think we send as many kids out of the system through a push-out concept of mental struggle as we're getting from it. So ideally, yes, an AI-based iterative assessment, year-long, focused on growth, and of course measuring proficiency, that by spring, we just know you don't need a summative assessment because we've been building it all year long.
So talk to me about the work with your districts, with your LEAs. Like, what's been the reception on that, and do you have some high flyers that are out in front on this? Like, what are your partners in districts doing?
Well, like any technology, I think there are some early adopters, and they're going fast, and we're encouraging that. Our message in Washington State, we were one of the first 4 or 5 states, and I think we built some of the best design around it, was go. Don't get into big long-term contracts because this landscape's changing so fast, but start building your school district and your board policy around it. Everyone had the first wave of like, this is going to be cheating, and of course the research doesn't back that up. But we needed districts to update their policies, and so they're in the middle of doing that. And a lot of them are spending their time showing educators the value of AI as a production tool for themselves. They're customizing lesson plans. I had an educator recently say I had a student never interested in reading because we were all reading the same text most of the time. And when he could tell me what he was interested in, I turned him in front of a screen and said, tell it what you're interested in. And it built a 3-page short story for him based entirely on what he wanted to read. And for the first time, he said, I just read a story that I created, and it's amazing. And so, gosh, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing, is building relationships and getting kids excited about learning? So we've got districts exploring this. We've built regional hubs of learning for AI. We've got our first big statewide conference coming up here this fall where teams will come to that conference. So it'll be classroom teachers and school board members and superintendents and some assessment folks as well. They're going to bring whole teams, have breakouts in their Java likes, and then also as teams. We're building this concept that AI is going to be a very real part, and we're not going to run from it. We're going to build upon it.
That's fantastic. So as we close out with your very short time with us today, can you talk to me about, you're talking to an audience of assessment and accountability experts, share the big picture you as a chief are thinking about and how these efforts, what is the advice you would give to people in other states and how they're thinking about this?
Well, I would say the best laid plans was to build a national accountability concept, and I still think it's the right thing to do.
Say that again, a national accountability.
I think what came about in the late 80s and early 90s was the idea that maybe we didn't want 50 states defining things 50 different ways, and there was a tremendous injustice to that. To this day, we pay a price for institutional racism that keeps a lot of black and brown boys, quite frankly, from achieving their beauty. So the standards movement was a fantastic foundation. I think those of you in this room who are expert in this understood the power of assessment to understand that we had to know. You can't change what you don't know, and you won't change what you don't measure, and I think that's beautiful. I'm going to be honest with you. From the Northwest liberal blue corner, we lost control of it several years ago. Assessment's being weaponized now against states. It's being weaponized against educators. They're using it to justify a privatization movement, I believe, in this country, and it's coming to my state, that says half our kids can't read, which is fundamentally not true. Half our kids may not be in 3rd grade or 6th grade or 7th grade at a level for university admissions without needing a remedial course. That's what most of you did. You designed backwards from college admissions. That is a very different story than half our kids can't read. 3/4 of our kids can't do math. But it really has been weaponized because I think this beautiful thing that your minds mostly do in the assessment world to try to create meaning of learning, we lost the message on it. And I would challenge everyone here to think about your next couple years in your career, how you make assessment matter about student growth, student success, how we tailor it and customize it. I believe AI will be a tool to do that. But the purpose of our learning systems is relationship building and learning. It's actually not assessments. That's just a tool. But now we've got an entire national movement that's using the assessment score in inappropriate ways to attack the very system that has been one of the greatest democratic tools America has ever known, which is taking the sons and daughters of millionaires and sitting them next to the sons and daughters of people on public assistance and learning fractions together in 3rd grade. That is at risk if the privatization movement dominates, and we did some of this to ourselves. So please lean into this moment as the big brains that you are, to think about the beauty of kids, the strength of kids, the growth of kids with high expectations and proficiency, but let's not build systems anymore that get used against us.
Please join me in thanking Superintendent Chris McDowell.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. So I am going to ask Secretary Katie Jenner to join me on the stage. Here she comes, Miss America.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So good to have you with us here. And we're going to dive in on the iLearn assessments and your through course assessment. But I want to start out with just like giving you an opportunity to give high-level overview of Indiana and your vision for education there.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's nothing like being in a room of psychometricians and talking about assessment. So full disclosure, and I think all the state chiefs who are here would say this, all of what we're talking about is only possible with amazing team members. So my phone a friend is right, where is she, Lynn? Lynn Schemmel. Stand up, Lynn. If you have questions about Indiana, stand up. She's an introvert, so she's like, this is her worst nightmare right now. If you have questions about assessment in Indiana, find Lynn. She's my go-to expert, and we also use a lot of you as key external partners as well. Thank you. High level in Indiana. First of all, we absolutely believe in student assessment and the power of student assessment to understand where we are as a state and to triage our high need areas. But number two, we also believe we must better leverage assessment to move the needle for kids. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about that in our redesign. First of all, just to level set where we are today as a state, where we've been. Like most states, we had one summative assessment at the end. We had and here's where it starts to get into terminology. Don't judge me on my terminology, assessment experts.
We're going to have an agreement here that the terms that are used, they're using to describe. So don't get hung up on whether someone says interim or formative.
Because I'm about to say both of those.
Scott, Marion, wherever you are in the room. Let's just not get hung up on that and focus on the big picture conversation. Here we go.
So we have in Indiana what's called a formative assessment grant, and really it's an interim assessment grant. But we have a variety of vendors. Many of you are in the room today who support our schools and teachers to know where students are, to try to drive learning in that way. The partners that exist in Indiana will remain, but we're going to leverage them in different ways in the future. And so I'm glad to talk a little bit about that, and those in the room know some of what we're building. But to look ahead, we had a lot of conversation that has been going on for years in Indiana from our parents and our educators who have said, give us data to help us move the needle immediately. And so we have purposefully redesigned our assessment to have 3 checkpoints. There will be 9-week flexible windows. They'll be flexible, even at the student level. They'll be flexible in terms of districts can choose, schools can choose, but they could even choose when to assess the student based on when the educator believes that they've mastered that standard. They assess the student just shows mastery or that they're still struggling. And then those 3 checkpoints, one different way that we're designing, and here comes all the judgment, so I'm going to tell you. One different way that we're designing it is so we have 3 checkpoints to inform how we might better help the student meet that learning objective. And then we'll have a shortened summative at the end of the year. The shortened summative is where our accountability score will come from. That's what is published publicly in every paper in Indiana and what the media talks about. And then I wrote this down. Lynn told me to say this. You all will know what it means. The shortened or the checkpoints throughout the year will also we'll take that full year into account when we do the reporting category scores. And I see 0 head nods. She told me to say, I see 1.
It's informing the information that
That's
you get.
exactly.
Lynn will explain it to you.
Lynn will explain it. But what's really, really interesting is so much about leading a state in education is, can you get people to follow? Can you get people with you? And anytime you talk about anytime you talk about change and assessment, it could cause major chaos because neither of those are popular terms, right? But we have changed assessment and allowed schools to opt in this next year. Out of 1,800 schools, all school types, in Indiana, we have over 1,300 schools who opted in because they are craving ready information that parents and teachers can have that's not being used to broadcast all over the newspaper, but it's really being used to help inform the student learning. so that they can better support that child. Another interesting piece and kind of an innovative feature, Carissa, is if a child does not master one of the 4 to 7 standards that are assessed in each of those windows, and the teacher goes back as they do and provide the intervention or instructional support, that teacher can then reassess that standard. They can reassess that standard through the whole year until the end of the year when that summer.
So it's not just a one-time.
It's not just a one-time. It's not meant to be punitive. It means leverage assessment in the best way we can to move the needle for kids.
So I'm gonna bring this up. We talked about this earlier this morning about you guys did an analysis of the districts, and you found that 80% of your districts had the similar kinds of scope and sequence to what you're offering. So I mean, the uptake from your districts might be largely due to that. That's pretty unheard of, because I will just say, I have yet to meet a state that tells me they are not local control. So we're all local control. Let's just put that on the table. We're all local control. But helping people move in the same direction and having a point towards that. So talk to me about how that tension for local control, but also wanting to have the same kinds of outcomes.
Yes. So I mean, I'll tell you again, we are a local control state. Yeah, you've heard that before.
It's like every conversation I start with the chief says, we're a local control state.
Yes. So we knew, and we've done this in a number of initiatives that we've driven in Indiana, it's all about buy-in and empowerment of your people.
Yep.
And so last April 2023, our assessment team sent out a survey to all schools, specifically trying to understand and develop that test blueprint and ultimately improve our scope and sequence. Like in many of your states, our students are very transient, and we are a school choice state in Indiana. It's pretty free market, and so we see that some. And how do we make sure, again, that at the end of the day, we're meeting the mark for every child? And so we did. We had an over 80% return rate, which absolutely informed our test blueprint and directionally,
how to lay that out so it makes a difference. Yeah. So talk about diverse needs of learners, because you're designing a system, and I think you're getting at some of this, which is, it's point in time, you can retake it. You're really trying to get the student to move at the end of the year, because at the end of this, we don't want the end of the year to look just like the same trajectory that the year before. So diverse learners, how are you guys addressing that?
So during the pilot year, and this will probably continue, but especially during the pilot year, we have strategic focus groups for our various student populations. And one of the things that they'll be looking at is everything from remote proctoring to potential reporting improvements that we need to continue doing, but then also the professional learning components. And I'd say they'll be looking not only at that for the schools and the educators, but we'll also be really looking at that for the parents and families and what they could be doing. We need them to be a part of this. So we'll be leveraging those focus groups throughout this year, and then so I'll probably would have more to say next year on what we learned from them, but glad to share that out.
Well, let's talk about the pilot, because you have a year under your belt on that, and that informed a lot of what you're going into.
The pilot is this year.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It's this coming up year.
So the pilot is 1,300 out of your 1,800 schools.
It is.
That's a fairly large pilot.
I had a legislator say, that's not really a pilot. And I'm like, well...
talk about terminology.
I didn't want to stress you out, but now I just said it in front of a room full of people. But legislators say a lot of things. And,
yeah, they do.
But
we won't get into that today.
We won't go there.
So talk about what kind of actionable data that you hope you're going to get from this. What you talked about, you're going to have the committees that will tell you that, but what's your hope for that?
Gosh, my hope, and I'm going to get into my personal hope, maybe not the assessment team's hope. Going back to our number one goal should be every child every day, and trying to move that needle to get closer to that mastery point, proficiency point. So my hope would be that we hear the successes and also the areas for improvement across the board on making sure not only the assessment administration is the best it can be, but for me, it really gets down to the instructional materials are what teachers need, and that real-time student support, which is again what some of our vendors here that are already partnered with Indiana, where we're going to be really strategically leveraging them. That's what I hope to hear, and that's what we'll continue to work to improve.
So this is not an insignificant lift, what you're doing.
Yep.
And I want to take us back to how did you get to this point where you're now moving to this system? What was the tipping point for you? You have a lot of initiatives going on in Indiana.
We do.
College and career readiness
Yep.
work. You could talk about those kinds of things. But how did you get the momentum
Yes.
to move a change like this forward?
Yeah, we have been, and there's no wood. This is definitely not wood. So if somebody has wood around you, knock on it. We have been very fortunate to be able to move a lot forward. And so much with change management is if that door or window is open, you better go through as fast as you can because it's going to close. So for us, our General Assembly required us to streamline our state standards. We had to streamline our state standards by 25%.
Let's punctuate that for just a minute.
Okay.
Streamline your state standards by 25%.
Yes.
That means reduce what's in your state standards by 25%.
That's what that means. And so we used educators.
Do you hear what's going on
I hear
here?
the giggling.
Yeah,
that was a lot.
That's
Again,
oh my
good
gosh,
team members.
please, less standards and yes.
So we were able to do that in all of our science, math, English, social studies. Sometimes more, sometimes right at that point. And so that standard streamlining then allowed us to leverage the moment and say, well, we have to adjust anyway. The other thing, again, I mentioned, and I can't emphasize enough, is there has been a hunger for this for a long time in Indiana to build out more of a through-year checkpoint system like this. So again, there was a hunger for that to the extent we're already getting pressure from people saying, well, what about K2? Can we build something out for K2? Well, what about, we started with math and ELA. Well, what about science and social studies? Can we build something out for those? So that moment was also there. And then I'd say thirdly, when you have in a state, and all states I know are unique in all ways, but when you have momentum and you're getting things done, which we are in Indiana right now, we're going to keep moving as fast as we can to make it better. And I will touch on this because I said it backstage.
You said a lot of things backstage,
I did.
right?
I say a lot of things a lot.
Okay, all right.
When we're thinking about re-envisioning assessment in America, we have to be very careful that we don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Because I'll tell you, and I said this in front of Lynn, what we're building out is better. It's better than what we have today, but I'm still not satisfied. We have not arrived yet. We have more R&D we have to put into the assessment space. And I think that goes into the work in this room to assess knowledge and skills at scale. When you think about, I met someone in the hallway who was talking about working with one of our Indiana's institutions to assess critical thinking at scale. I think that is directionally, full disclosure, where we're also looking ahead in Indiana. How do we assess those skills at scale? It's what our parents are craving, our business and industry, and even our higher ed, our most advanced higher ed are also looking for. So we're not going to rest on our momentum. Our door is still wide open. And as long as we can drive, we're going to keep on pushing.
So let's close it out by the advice you might give to others in this room, people saying this would be fantastic. It's something I'd love to see our state do, or, we're on a different trajectory. What's the advice you would give?
Yeah. Number one, and I've said it multiple times, leading change is totally dependent on who you surround yourself with, internally and externally. Your team, our team matters. So it's again, the Department of Education team, but it's also many of you who've also linked arms with Indiana. It's many of you who grab one of us in the hallway and are pushing us to think bigger. I think when the water rises, we all lift. And so I'd say number one is who we surround ourselves, and we have to keep pushing. Where we are today in our country, and I know, Chris, you had some thoughts about that. Kirsten and I backstage were like, yes, yes. And we're coming from, you said a blue state, Indiana's red, but very different states, and we're both like, yes. So we have to keep pushing, and we have to have good people with us at the table.
Well, please join me in thanking Secretary Katie Jenner. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite to the stage Superintendent Kirsten Baszler as our last panelist. And as Katie walks off, I'll just punctuate one of the things she said, which is like using the words change and assessment make you ultimately popular in all of your worlds. So, hello, Kirsten.
Hey, Carissa, great to be here.
Does that sound like something that you might have encountered before?
Once or twice.
Yeah. So, Kirsten, you are implementing a comprehensive assessment system where you integrate summative, interim, and formative assessments. Again, we're not getting hung up on the words here. Can you elaborate on your assessment system and how you got to this point about why you're moving in this direction?
I sure am. It's hard to take the stage after my two esteemed colleagues, so knowledgeable, so much good information to share, and so effective at what they do. But I will try to tell you a little about what we're doing in North Dakota. I'm going to I will try to be very specific with my words, because if Scott Marion is in the room, I will be prepared for any critique that he takes about how I may have gotten it wrong.
There are the grammar police, and then there's the assessment police.
So if we could cue the slide, this visual, I am a visual learner, this visual hopefully will come up on screen. And this really describes what our A+ system is. It's the North Dakota A+ system, and A+ stands for A+. Just really quick, it's the A+. Everybody's striving for an A+, but it stands for the North Dakota Academic Progression of Learning and Understanding of Students. And so it really is, identifies in its name. It's short, it's quickly, it's hopefully memorable, but it really does describe what we have built. We have not built a summative assessment in isolation. We have built a balanced assessment system that is connected so we can better understand the learning of our students. And so this graphic outlines the foundation of our NDA Plus with our formative assessment that is all the way across the bottom. And so this formative assessment can be used by our teachers on demand at any time that they need it to determine where a student or a group of students in their classroom may be on a particular standard. The interim assessment is a smaller assessment that is based off of the summative blueprint that is given throughout the year to serve a number of purposes, not to inform the instruction, that's the formative, because our interim assessment is not going to be able to get down to that granular level. But the interim assessment that is, again, I'll repeat that, is based on a smaller scale of our summative blueprint, will be able to be possibly predictive of how our students are performing or may perform on the summative assessment. It may provide the opportunity for our classroom teachers to make some different decisions, not about specific instruction for a child, but how will they allocate their resources differently? How will they assign their paraprofessionals in their room? What might they do with a certain group of students? Building principals can use that interim assessment result to plan professional development or adjust professional developments for certain grade levels. And then, of course, the summative assessment. And so those three things together is the North Dakota A+ system. Very, very important that it all builds off of another, and all of them are connected to and aligned to our very specific North Dakota state standards, English language arts and science.
Kirsten, you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about how both the interim and the formative can be used to inform instruction. But I know one of the really important things in North Dakota has been your focus on Native American students.
Yes.
And talk to us about the connection of this new assessment system and your focus for your Native students.
So again, I think this is for our Native American students. Obviously, with that NAVI, the NAVI is the crown jewel. We obviously built the summative, and then we built the interim assessment. But as we're building this NAVI, which is our formative assessment that can be used by our classroom teachers, assessments have been occurring. Formative, interim, and summative assessments have been occurring for decades and decades, but none of them were connected. They were all a very disconnected system of assessments that were not aligned or connected to or measuring the same thing. And particularly for our Native American students, when North Dakota state law required that interim assessments be given, and the summative assessment obviously is required by all of us, but the assessment systems the assessment choices that were being used some of them were criterion referenced, some of them were norm referenced. Our Native American, teachers of our Native American students were working their tails off. Families were working their tails off to try to support these students. They were hearing that they were, 80%, they were at the 80th percentile on their interim assessment. And then suddenly their summative assessment comes along in the spring of the year, and our teachers would describe it to me as being sucker punched. They thought all of their students were doing well. And when if you don't give teachers and families and students themselves the right tools and the right feedback along the way, they don't know what to do. And with this assessment system of formative, interim, and summative, our teachers of Native American students, our teachers of our students with disabilities, all of those individuals are given better information to use high quality instructional materials, to adjust the instruction based on the formative assess that is tied to the interim that is somewhat predictive of our summative. So it matters.
So I know, Kirsten, with the sunsetting of ESSER funds, one of the things you set aside was this fund for teachers to apply to do professional development or things in their classrooms. I know it's something you'd like to see continued from there. And you talked a little bit about the informative of professional development. So talk to me about some of your other efforts and how this will inform professional development, because of course you're a local control state too. So.
Absolutely a local control state.
Yeah.
And so let's be clear, and I think I'm using the right.
I needed to ask Chris, are you a local control state, Chris?
Well, absolutely not.
You're a liar. Everyone in your local communities think they are. So, well, I will tell you that, and that's one of the, I will back up and say that disconnectedness was a problem for me when I took office 12 years ago.
12 years
12 years ago.
That's incredible.
And I knew that it could be different. I saw that it could be different, but you've been hearing me say that, our partners in the room have been hearing me say that, begging all of you psychometricians to say, help us. There is a better way. We can't do it, but help us, help us. And so we were making the decision whether or not we were going to go through year. I will tell you that I don't have what Katie has in Indiana. We don't have 80% of our school districts that are on the same scope and sequence. And so that was not an option for us. And so what we were able to do when we made the decision was to say, we are going to build something that is comprised of those three different types that are connected to our standards. And one will inform the other. But when we set out to build that, the first and most important thing was to put out an RFP. No, first and most important thing was for me, that gets to dive into this just to the surface level, was to hire an assessment director that truly believed that the possible was there. Couldn't hire someone that knew what the answers were or knew what the conditions were or could follow a recipe card. Needed to hire someone that could see the vision.
Do you want to call him out right now?
I would love to. Stan Shower, Stan. And I've pushed him. I pushed him and I pushed him. And I said, I know you don't know the answers, but you have to learn and you have to ask the questions. And it's really not about the answers. It's about asking curious questions. And sometimes I've wanted to roll that back and quit asking me such curious questions. But So once, it set him off with a very high task of writing an RFP almost single-handedly. We don't have the benefit of having 30 people on our assessment team. We have 168 school districts, but we have 86 members on our state team total. So like 2.5 members. We don't have a $30 million budget. So finding the right partner to say, we don't know the answers, this is what North Dakota wants. We don't know if we can build it, but we're going to try. But so to address specifically what your question was, when we started building this progression of learning and understanding of students, it became very clear to us that assessment literacy was a real challenge. I think we all as states have some learning to do in assessment literacy, but we knew our teachers, our building principals, our district leaders needed some significant assessment literacy support. And so even all along at every step of the way, we are weaving, it's necessary for us to weave in assessment literacy at every conference we do, at every professional development offering that we provide. So our teachers are literate in assessment, our building principals, even our school board members need to be literate in assessment, understanding and interpretation. So that is one of the additional things that we are doing as we have built an assessment. And that speaks to the additional demands that in the 12 years that I've been in office, the state's role in an assessment system has drastically changed. If I can share a quote, because
Sure,
I think this sums it up really well, and thanks to Stan for feeding this to me. But the Bellwether Education Partners, O'Keefe and Lewis, put out an article called The State of Assessment. And on page 5 of that report, it states, whereas once the state role in assessment was almost entirely limited to developing and administering traditional summative tests, states are now thinking about ways to build more comprehensive assessment systems that include different kinds of tests and align with parallel efforts to improve instruction, professional development, standards, and curriculum. That speaks in that statement that we cannot be talking about one thing without talking about the entire continuum of all that we do to improve our students' outcomes.
I would also just punctuate that in that time, numbers of staff at SEA who do assessment has not increased. The assessment budget has not increased significantly. And so back to the conversation with Chris about the utilization of AI to help leverage some of these things to be able to do this bigger system is going to absolutely be necessary. So, so talk to us about the timeline for this. Where are you at right now? Are you in the pilot phase with like 95% of your districts doing it?
So our first full implementation of our summative assessment will be in the spring 2025. So we began a pilot. So I should first note that obviously our summative assessment is required both federally and state, but the interim assessment aligned to our content standards and the NAVI formative assessment are not. That is a volunteer opportunity. It is state provided, state supported, no cost to our school districts, but because we are a local control state, the law required that a school district, every school building, provide an interim assessment at least 2 times a year. We recommend 3. And of course, they can choose whatever formative assessment they want to inform their instruction. But we implemented or administered the interim assessment this last year. More and more school districts, as word spread about it being aligned, about the same test platform. I understand teachers were cheering when they said that they would have the same test platform and that they wouldn't need to know different. And if our teachers are feeling that way, imagine how our students are feeling, all of those not needing to manage and navigate. And think about that opportunity for our students to actually focus more of their attention on solving the problems of ELA, math, and science. And so full implementation of our, as I said, the crown jewel, the NAVI, the formative will begin this fall, and the summative will be this spring. And of course, we have the level, scores that will happen next summer. So really excited about it. But it's been a 5-year build.
Yeah, talk to us about the stakeholder engagement and how you built to this point.
So stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical. Getting your teacher feedback, getting your assessment coordinators within the district, their feedback. They helped us select the RFPs. They helped write the RFP and they helped score the RFP. And that was absolutely critical. Now it's all hands on deck as we are moving, throughout the ABCs of all of your organizations and presenting, and I should say it's the 2.5 assessment team that is doing that, along with our regional education. But going through all of those, presenting at the MTSS conference, helping the MTSS advocates within each school district understand how this assessment system will help their work and form their work. But do not underestimate the teacher's voice in all this. Do not underestimate, and that's one of the things I said, the simple things. We tend to, as psychometricians in the audience, as state leaders, even as legislators, we tend to get really caught up in the big picture thinking about what an assessment can and should do, but we mustn't, and I'm guilty of that as well. We mustn't do that because without us getting on the dance floor every now and again to find out what our teachers want, without their support, we will go back to the day of teachers saying, oh, that assessment doesn't matter, I don't care, this is the assessment that I use. And what we've learned from our teachers is that they want timely information, specific information, and accurate information. And you must build an assessment system that ties that timely, specific, and accurate information that they're doing every day in their classroom to that summative that they'll take in the spring. Because if you haven't tied it to that in some through line, they will continually say to their parents, to their families, to their community members, that test doesn't matter. And it does matter. It does.
Yeah. Well, Kirsten, I'm going to close us out by welcoming you back as CCSSO's board president. So for those of you in the audience who don't know, Kirsten served a term as CCSSO board president and recently had a vacancy in the board president. So Kirsten came back to be board president again for us. So we're so happy to have her be a part of that. But on behalf of the CCSSO board, and you think about a 5-year look, what are you thinking about? What's the future look like for you, whether it's assessment or general for education?
I think we will become more and more laser focused on student outcomes. It is the reason that we exist. I think technology will rapidly change the way that we are able to do our work, and the opportunities that we have to leverage technology to inform what we're gathering from our students and our school districts. I'm very excited about what the future holds. I think there's never been a greater time to help our students, sit at the table that they deserve to sit at. So I, again, just will thank all of our partners in the room. If there's something that has been so clear to me in the last 12 years, we cannot do this work without you, and that includes CCSSO. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. Please join me in thanking Kirsten Basler. I'm going to wrap us up today, and I want to give another round of applause to Superintendent Reichtel, Secretary Jenner, and Superintendent Basler. We did a very short, rapid fire, and it was almost like quizzing them. Really, it was like giving them an assessment of what are you doing with this in your world. So please join me in thanking them again. If you're interested in learning more about the work underway in North Dakota, you can visit with Superintendent Basler and her esteemed team this afternoon at Level 3, Room 305 from 2 to 3 p.m. That information is also in your program. I also want to take an opportunity to thank our sponsors, which you see here on the screen. We could not do what we do without the support and sponsorship of these organizations. So please join me in thanking our sponsors. The exhibit hall is now open, and I'd encourage you to visit it before the next session, which begins at 1:30. It's on, the exhibit hall is level 5 Elwha. And I will just say, I think I saw that Carla had started up some kind of scavenger hunt or some kind of thing where you actually get prizes. So you might want to go check that out and see what it is that you can get. But with that, I want to wish you all an informative and inspiring next couple of days. I hope we've sparked some ideas and thoughts and conversations that will help you think about how you provide coherent assessment systems for all learners. Thank you.